Have a roll call, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton,
Here.
Mayor Lay, Councilmember Fahey,
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Here.
Councilmember Cooperman,
Here.
Councilmember Hefner, Councilmember Kern.
Present.
Thank you very much. I expect the mayor to be joining us soon. He contacted me asking to start the meeting as he's en route to City Hall. Will you please stand up and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you very much. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Okay. Now we move on to public comments on items not on the agenda and items on the consent agenda. So as a reminder, if you have a public comment, please tell us your name and if you are a Louisville resident. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes or 6 minutes if you're pooling your time with another person in attendance, either in person or online as it stands tonight. Just a reminder, all opinions are welcomed. We ask that everyone be respectful of each speaker, and to ensure that everyone feels welcome to share their comments, we ask that those participating refrain from any cheering, clapping, booing, or otherwise disruptive behavior. City Clerk, do we have any comments? No comments. Thank you very much. Let the record show that Councilmember Hefner has now joined the meeting. We'll now move on to the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Can I get a voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to council informational comments and committee reports. Do any council members have informational items, committee reports that they would like to share tonight? Seeing none, we'll move on to the city manager's report.
Good evening, Council. Tomorrow at Fire Station 3 is the Louisville Fire Protection District Change of Command ceremony. It starts at 2 p.m. Next week, we have the Comprehensive Plan Open House on January 28th at the Simon, which is at the corner of South and Main, from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. Next week also, we have the mayor's meeting on January 29th, which wraps up our ward meetings. That'll be at the rec center at 6 p.m. And then just to recognize that the Open Space Division just released their BioBlitz results. So thank you.
There we go. We'll now move on to regular business. Up first is agenda item A, Development Code Update Requests for Proposals, RFP. I believe, does staff have a presentation? All right, we'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So let me get this started here. Okay, so the purpose of this item is to share the draft development code update request for proposals with council and to request approval for us to move forward and start the procurement process based on the RFP that's in your packet. The contract would come back to council for the consultant team, so you would see a more detailed scope of work as part of that. Really brief background, this has been a long-standing city council priority. Definitely a priority among others that we've heard from, like with the comprehensive plan and the housing plan. And we hear about it really day to day with property owners, developers, others. So it's definitely been a priority item for quite a while. We have a really strong policy foundation, recent policy foundation to build off of through each of these documents and others. I'm happy to talk more about how that foundation works, but the development code is really one of the strongest implementation tools that we have for all these different planning efforts. The specific scope of work includes a comprehensive update to Title 16 and 17 of the Louisville Municipal Code, so that's subdivisions and zoning. And then parts of Title 15, that's the buildings title of the code. So historic preservation lives in Title 15. We envision that being part of this update and a couple other parts of Title 15. This RFP does include updates to all 4 of our design standards and guidelines. Those are decades old and in need of update as well. So we have that scoped, and also to consider potentially new supplemental multifamily development design standards and guidelines that would be on that same level as the others. Some of the key issues, and we didn't plan to get into the substantive issues, that will be part of the scoping and the whole project process, but I'm happy to do that tonight if you'd like. But overall, needing to modernize our development code, we've never really comprehensively updated it, so it is overdue. At a high level, our goals are a much more user-friendly, predictable document. We've talked about streamlining development review. We'll touch on how we're doing some interim steps on that front, but that would certainly be a priority with this project as well. There'll be a lot of sort of like targeted heavy lift items within the code update. So for example, updating the Old Town Overlay District is going to be a big one. Our inclusionary housing ordinance and updating that will be a big part of this. We expect other large topics to emerge. We also put in the scope that it's important for us to have market responsive or market sort of reality-based regulations in terms of any incentives and things like that, and in terms of getting the outcomes that we want from a market perspective and not stymieing development, for example. Some other key issues, the project governance is to be determined, and I think we want to have that discussion certainly with our selected consultants, but at the direction of council. So we don't have a proposal yet in terms of advisory committee or anything like that. We do have an RFP to consider form-based or performance-based zoning as a tool. Again, we want to work with the consultants to see what their ideas are, but that is an option on the table. These last 2 bullet points warrant a little bit of explanation. We see it as important to address, you can call it a number of different things, but it's referred to as legacy zoning here, which is basically if we adopt a new development code and it creates a lot of quote unquote like nonconformities in the community or a lot of obsolete zoning where there's this big disconnect between old and new, we want support to clean up that disconnect. And so that's part of the scope. We don't know what that looks like yet. That will evolve, but happy to talk more about that. And in the same sort of bucket is the idea of support for any city-initiated rezoning. So property owner outreach, community engagement in and around, if that is a route we want to go, to leave room in the scope for us as a city to initiate those. If we have like a new lineup of zone districts, helping folks transition into the, for economic vitality purpose, housing affordability purposes, could be any number of things. The approach, I guess sort of philosophically in the RFP is to try not to be too prescriptive. We'd like to keep it flexible and have the, the consultant team propose, how they would get us there in terms of meeting our goals and objectives for the project. And so in terms of the specific deliverables that would be in the RFP, we would expect there to be potentially others, but we expect at the core there'll be an initial like diagnostic report and framework document, annotated outline, whatever we call it, that lays out sort of exactly what the plan is as the blueprint for the project. That'll be an early deliverable, and then of course the updates to all the rules themselves. We did work into the scope the importance of having sort of training materials, so not only having like training sessions like with council, the development community, others, like how to use this code kind of trainings, but also some materials that are sort of how-to guides. The intent is to make it very user-friendly, but there will inevitably be the need for a lot of supplemental stuff like how do you measure the height of a building, things like that. So that's part of the scope. The adoption and post-adoption support deliverable is what I was just mentioning in terms of the legacy zoning and the city-initiated rezoning. And so whatever deliverables come out of that, we don't know exactly yet. Our timeline is to release the RFP very soon after this discussion with the target of in and around April for consultant selection. We do estimate about a 2-year process to get to adoption. And a reminder that at council's direction from last October, November regarding the development review process improvements. We plan to move forward with those in the near term and not wait for this to play out. So that those interim improvements are being worked on currently and getting those to you as soon as possible. This effort definitely aligns with the council work plan. It's an explicit item and it touches on really all 4 of the core council priorities. In terms of the budget, so City Council allocated $600,000 for the project. We were able to have been able to secure an additional about $400,000 to support specifically the environmental sustainability and the housing affordability components. And those are through supplemental grants that we were able to get. We say about $400,000 because for one of the grants, we're still working out the exact details. So we don't know the exact amount yet, but it will be really close to this additional $400,000. So our recommendation as staff is to approve the draft RFP and authorize release, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Council members have questions? Yes.
Great, thank you for this. So one quick question since we're on the fiscal impact. So do we anticipate this to cost around $1 million? So it would take the combination of the two, or are we kind of hoping that the grant money maybe would only need a matching amount and we're giving ourselves a buffer?
The total around $1 million would be the total project budget.
Okay. And so in this, it seems like we're relying a lot on the consultant to like create a lot of the framework, but like you guys have done a really good job and heard a lot from us, heard the community. You worked with developers and have ideas, I think, on what you wanted to see. Will that be incorporated? Will you be able to give them that information in advance just so that it's they're not spending all of their time and bringing it back and you saying, oh, they missed the 10 key things we were actually looking for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from our perspective, the sort of the bones are there in the RFP to like, those are the core elements that we expect. And if we express the goals and objectives, I think that's enough of a foundation for them to sort of develop a scope and kind of flesh things out. So some consultants may be an expert in form-based codes, for example, and we're not necessarily an expert in that on that front. So they may have ideas. We want to make sure it's flexible for those kinds of ideas. But the core kind of formula we think and hope is in the RFP to work with.
Are there any other communities whose plans that look better, feel better to you guys that you want them to use as maybe examples or follow? So, and something for us to think about too, that where it is working.
I don't know yet. I don't know if we know yet. Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of cities that have updated their development codes. It's very common to, there's a lot of good examples of combining into a unified land development code. That helps with clarity. I think policy-wise, every city's different on what they're trying to achieve. There's a lot of good examples of more form-based codes from around the Denver area. So I think we have a lot of good examples. We'll be working hand in hand with the consultant. We just don't set them free. We'll be directing them through each step. There will be check-ins with City Council and Planning Commission along the way as well on critical components. So they'll be taking direction from staff, Planning Commission, and City Council throughout the process.
So if you don't mind, is there a piece in here that, and maybe it's getting into the weeds, where was one of the things we had talked about was streamlining some of the process where it makes it a lot easier for developers. There's anticipated, there's expectations, almost let's say like a list of 10 items. You check every one of those, you know that we're going to be able to approve you more quickly or easily. Are there things like that we're kind of anticipating will come from this then? Rob's nodding his head yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think to address that issue, you can do it through the processes and also through like the development standards. So, making sure our standards are really clear and like metrics. So it's not like it's not this ambiguous, subjective, does this meet it or does it not? So if you take care of like the core development standards and make those really predictable, that's one piece of the puzzle. Another is, and this will be a policy decision early in the project, is like, what are the thresholds and the levels of review we want to see, like public hearing wise? And so I think that'll be a big discussion is, do we want it just to be for bigger projects or medium-sized projects? Are the smaller projects able to just come through an administrative process that's super predictable and clear? We'll take a look at like our approval criteria for all of our decisions, for rezonings, PUDs, GDP, all of it. Those need a major cleanup, and those are constantly a challenge to interpret, and there's a lot of issues there. So through criteria, through, figuring out what those thresholds are, and so those like quote unquote lesser impact projects can come in through a really clear, predictable process. But there's just so many unknowns, but that's definitely a goal, is to try to figure out how we make it a lot more predictable and streamlined.
Okay, that would be excellent. Just last question. I was curious to know, with nearly 50% of what we expect the funding to go to help, to use the word bolster environmental sustainability and housing affordability components, are we anticipating that like 40% of the project will be in those areas? I'm trying to understand how that
Yeah.
is 40% of this process in the plan.
It's a really good question, and we've worked with our grantors to get a deeper understanding of what exactly is applicable to those grants. So, and the quick answer is it's very broad and very flexible. So within the bucket of environmental sustainability, for example, parking regulations are in that bucket. Creating new zone districts that are like transit oriented is within that bucket, in addition to the more kind of tangible energy efficiency things. So, and the same thing for housing affordability, like anything related to housing is eligible for that particular grant. So that could be the inclusionary housing ordinance, but also so these are things that are already programmed into the code update. It's just giving them more resources so we can do a better job. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Councilmember Cooperman.
Thank you. Start with a sort of a follow-up question to that last one. Could you give us a sense for how you expect those, $400,000 to be spent, sort of, like how, I assume we will hire additional people or something like that. How will they sort of fit into the process, or how do you expect them to fit in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is it enables us to do a lot more within the overall project. So, for example, I don't know if we would have the budget or the bandwidth to address all the design standards and guidelines with just the 600,000. And so it allows us to address all of it more holistically, and you can find the sustainability and housing pieces within each component, really.
Okay. And maybe to make it a little bit more concrete, like, do we expect, say, the consultants we hire to have people who are sort of associated with these roles, or do we expect to find those people in some other way, or?
Sorry, maybe I'm not understanding. But related to the grants or related to?
Related to the grants,
Yeah, yeah.
So like, that grant money came to us, but, are we going to just like pay the consultants to have people who are specializing in those areas, or what are we?
Yes, so we're not, you had mentioned hiring, like, we wouldn't be hiring staff, we would be hiring a consultant. And so whatever consultant comes in, we'll expect them to have knowledge and expertise in all of these areas. There are consultants out there that have broad knowledge around the Denver area that could do a project like this. So I think it's going to be a really competitive project too. The benefit of the higher budget too is I think we'll get, really good consulting firms interested in this project. It is extensive, and so it takes a big budget to be successful with a project like this as well, especially with, community input in the process and engaging with City Council and Planning Commission. We'll have a really robust, with this budget, we'll have a really robust ability to do that type of engagement.
Okay, good. And one little question that's just a clarification. From reading the staff report, it sounded like we were not going to touch very much on historic preservation, but then you made a comment during your presentation that maybe we would. So I'm just
Yeah, I think
clarifying.
we talked about this among staff, and we don't see a lot of major changes needed to the historic preservation ordinance. So it's just a matter of clarifying that's a big chunk of Title 15, and we would potentially look to bring it into, Rob mentioned a unified development ordinance, like there might be a way to bring it all together into one place. So it's at minimum carrying them forward and looking for redundancies and cleanups, but I think substantively we haven't yet identified any major changes that we would propose.
And I would just add, we have zoning incentives built into our zoning ordinance for historic preservation, so those will get refreshed through this as one tangible item. And then I think we need to look at Old Town lot sizes. There's definitely been a lot of discussion and input about, you know, the zoning that we have doesn't support historic lot sizes, so there's an ability to get, you know, smaller, more character appropriate homes, as well as add to housing affordability, so there's overlap with historic preservation on that. So it's not like our grant program specifically, but it's other elements of historic preservation.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask a question about our inclusionary housing ordinance. So is it your expectation that we would not update that until the end of this process?
We were planning to bring an update before an interim update as well. Council did provide direction. I know it's been a while, but we are planning to bring that forward as soon as possible before this. And then as part of this, a more kind of holistic, comprehensive look at, you know, any major updates we might want to see.
Okay, no, that's great. That's what I was hoping for. So I'll just make one little comment. You know, it's in the weeds, I guess, but, you know, when we do get to the design standards, I'm quite interested in trying to incorporate the work that staff has done on dark sky lighting. Otherwise, I'm quite happy with the RFP as it stands, and I just want to say thank you for the work you put into it.
Other council member questions? Yes. Dickinson.
Yeah, looking forward to this. One question kind of similar to Councilmember Kern is, you know, time, like phase one, sometimes I feel like that's a year, right? Like just spending time gathering information and interviewing people and doing public engagement and coming out of a housing plan that we have adopted and out of a comp plan that we've just done an enormous amount of engagement. Are we going to go back and re-engage everyone with a new third party to ask what seems to be some similar questions? And I'm sure there will be unique things and stuff I'm not thinking of, but can you help me understand, is phase one thought to be, when I see robust public engagement, that doesn't sound like carrying on or assessing the engagement we've already done. That sounds like months of public engagement. Is that what you guys are expecting?
Yeah, I think the engagement takes on a completely different form because it's so technical and detailed, and it's just a different, you know, folks are. So I think the short answer is I think we want to have those discussions with the consultant team and figure out what the best practice is for that meets our needs. But I think we would envision more focused conversations with technical experts, quote unquote. So more focused, like this would be something the consultants would have to be really good at, is how do you engage with the developers? How do you engage with affordable housing advocates, neighborhood advocates? So I think they're going to be very focused, like code user type discussions, in addition to some broad, I don't know what the initial, if there will be, what the broader public engagement will look like. There'll definitely be an opportunity for that, but it's not asking vision and values type questions, certainly. It's technically like, how do we implement the vision and values?
No, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Council members? Okay. Why don't we take some public comment? We only have one member of the public in our chambers, and I presume that if he would like to put a card in, he certainly can. Public comment is 3 minutes, and you can talk about whatever you'd like on this. Do we have any public comment? None? All right. Well, then we'll move on to council discussion. Is there any direction? You've had questions, right? Any direction that council would like to give specifically on this? Yes. Councilmember
I thought
Hefner.
Councilmember Dickinson had interesting questions regarding public engagement, and I guess the direction I'm interested in is just making sure we don't recreate the comp plan wheel in terms of having lots of broad-based public engagement to decide what our land use values are. And I didn't hear that that's what's planned, but just want to reinforce that point.
Others? I have just one comment, which builds on both of the points that are made, which is, I guess, the importance of maybe talking to the folks who submitted RFPs and you maybe are interviewing to find out how they intend to keep the focus narrower than comp plan, housing plan stuff, because I do think that's an ever-present concern. I think it's potentially a tactical concern of people who have criticisms or will have criticisms of the comp plan. And we're not meaning to relitigate issues on the comp plan for a while. It's a living document over time, but too early. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. These are really good comments. And to clarify, yes, this is implementing the comp plan and the housing plan. There's no intent to re-engage on those policies. I think when we start looking at the downtown design handbook, the Old Town overlay, and all of the design standards, like those do need some public engagement. So I think we're talking about that mostly when it comes to the design standards, but not implementing the intent of the comprehensive plan. That would be the guiding document of what this is implementing.
Understood. Yes, Councilmember Kern.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that and publicly clearing it up, because that was one of the comments that I did hear from people in this comprehensive plan process was, when can we talk about maybe some of those standards? And the comprehensive plan wasn't necessarily, it's a much bigger, broad topic or a broader document. So this may be addressing that point then, where people can come in and give their opinions, at least, on what they think that they would like to see happening in those specific types of housing or in parts of town, correct? That's great. Thank you very much.
I just move that we approve the attached RFP and direct staff to proceed.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, good. Good discussion, good presentation. Thank you very much for that. I know that was a big lift to put together this piece, and fine job. Next matter is ordinance number 1912, series 2026, and the ordinance approving the ConocoPhillips Campus General Development Plan Amendment 2. This is a first reading to set public hearing. We're going to hear the staff report for this ordinance tonight, or I should say a verbal staff report for the ordinance. We're not going to be opening the public hearing or taking public comment. Council, of course, can ask questions and potentially make amendments for second reading or instruct staff to return with additional information. So with that, staff has a report, right?
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Councilors, Matt Post, planner on the Community Development Team. Item before you tonight is the first reading of the ConocoPhillips Campus General Development Plan, Second Amendment. The applicant is requesting approval of the Second Amendment to the ConocoPhillips Campus General Development Plan to allow the application of industrial development design standards and guidelines with the inclusion of enhanced architectural standards in place of the existing commercial development and design standards and guidelines that apply campus-wide at Red Tail Ridge. This,
Can I interrupt for a minute? I actually have to recuse myself from this. What'll wait on the drive, a conflict of interest? I'll step out.
okay.
Councilmember Hefner has left the room, and you can resume.
Again, so application of enhanced architectural features with the IDDSG in place of the commercial design standards on interior parcels at the Red Tail Ridge development area. So as council is aware, the entire site known as Red Tail Ridge is currently zoned planned community commercial and is subject to the ConocoPhillips Campus General Development Plan First Amendment, which was approved late last year. And the Second Amendment will apply to 4 internal parcels at the site highlighted in this graphic on the exhibit in red. Those parcels total 111 acres in size and are generally central to the overall site. The parcels shown in blue on this map are parcels where the commercial development design standards will still apply, while the parcels shown in green are dedicated open space or are parcels to be utilized for site-wide drainage and detention. Long site history here, but in 2010, the City Council approved the original ConocoPhillips Campus GDP, which is the base document being amended this evening. That initial GDP included 2.5 million square feet of, or a cap rather, of 2.5 million square feet of development area, and then applied the commercial development design standards site-wide. More recently, the City Council approved the final plat for the subject property, which is reflected in the current parcel layout. That was in 2024, and at the end of last year, you'll recall the council approved the First Amendment to the GDP, which affected the hospital parcel. Also, at the end of last year, the applicant presented a concept plan to the City Council to consider applying the industrial development design standards and guidelines based on the non-binding feedback that was received. I think the council expressed a desire for a hybrid enhanced approach to maintain flexibility while allowing an enhanced architectural or requiring an enhanced architectural design. So again, the affected area is highlighted in yellow on this screen. So moving into the proposal, again, those perimeter parcels will remain under commercial development standards, including the Advent Health Hospital site, which is one of the easternmost parcels. That is a 40-acre parcel. That surrounding commercial development will ensure that the project's public-facing edges along those arterial roadways and Highway 36 will remain under that commercial development standard. With this amendment, the interior parcel, specifically lots 1, 2, 3, and 5 of Block 1, would be subject to the industrial development design standards and guidelines with the additional architectural enhancements that are proposed. I'll cover the details of those enhancements on the next slide here. In considering this amendment, staff and the applicant acknowledge that the general development plan, which was originally approved in 2010, contemplated and allows for light industrial use types. Those uses include research and development, manufacturing, fabrication, warehousing, and technical manufacturing. Those uses generally do not align well with commercial design standards. Light industrial and research development uses typically require larger sites, larger rectangular buildings, expansive loading areas and docks with roll-up doors, outdoor storage areas, enhanced and more robust mechanical equipment requirements, and high bay structures. Those would be large single-story buildings to operate effectively under those use categories. So by applying those industrial design standards with the enhanced architectural treatments, staff are of the opinion that this approach provides the flexibility necessary to establish the use types that are permitted in the GDP while ensuring that the overall design quality goes above and beyond what would otherwise be required in our industrial zone districts, such as the CTC. So part of the proposal, again, are those enhanced standards. So beyond just what is contained in the industrial development design guidelines, which apply, again, these enhanced standards will also apply. The full and complete standards are included in your staff report, and they are on the GDP amendment, so I'm happy to discuss those in additional detail if any questions arise. But I think some of the key design features that we've included there include transparency requirements to ensure that buildings present an active and pedestrian-oriented frontage. And those transparency requirements would apply to any building facade that faces a public or a private street. They would be required to provide 50% of the facade would have to be transparent in the area 2 to 10 feet above grade. Transparency is achieved through the installation of glass, doors, or windows. We've also included a transparency requirement on a second story, or rather, any building that's taller than 18 feet has to provide a minimum of 18% transparency. In the area that is 12 to 30 feet above grade, again, this simulates a second story, breaks up the building horizontally to relieve the impact of what is just an individual high structural bay in those industrial applications. The key feature of the enhanced standards here, which are absent from the industrial design guidelines, would be enhanced entry feature requirements for these buildings. The entry standards that we've contemplated here include requirements that entrances be provided and oriented toward a public or a private street. A minimum number of entry features are required based on the overall length of a building, with each individual entry feature requiring to meet additional transparency, material, and articulation requirements. Additionally, we're requiring that those enhanced entry features occupy at least 20% of the total building facade length on the building facade on which they are located, and that they are a minimum of 10 feet wide. The updated standards also include material and texture variation requirements, and the standard that no more a single texture or color or material can't comprise more than 75% of the overall facade on which it is located. Again, additional standards are provided, and I'm happy to discuss those in additional detail if you'd like to go through those. Happy to do that further in the design here. So what's shown here on screen is a rendering that was initially provided by the applicant. These features that are presented on this particular tilt-up product would satisfy the enhanced industrial design standards. You can see articulation in the overall entry feature, recessed entry features, awnings over the entries. The transparency standards are satisfied. We have corner treatments that are provided. And then in addition, the entire design of the entry feature encompasses the full height of the facade. So it's proportional to the facade. Again, that's also a standard that we have worked on implementing to ensure that it breaks up the overall monotony of what would otherwise be a concrete tilt-up building. So again, these were provided by the applicant. Moving into the analysis here, there are no specific review criteria for general development plans within planned community zone districts, although amendments need to follow the same process for when a general development plan was initially adopted. That process includes ensuring that the establishment of general development plans encourages, preserves, and improves the health, safety, and welfare of the community through contemporary land planning principles and design. It also ensures that the GDP recognizes the economic and cultural advantages of integrated planned communities by providing opportunities for a variety of land uses. Finally, the GDP plan must allow for the appropriate, or should allow for the appropriate economic use of the site based on land uses permitted under the plan. Just some additional analysis here. Staff took into account, what we had mentioned previously, which was that light industrial and research land uses are a permitted use associated with the original entitlement in 2010 of the GDP, which make the industrial development design standards and guidelines with the enhanced architectural requirements a more appropriate design framework for the areas that the applicant has programmed interior to the site for those research and light industrial uses. And working with the applicant, we were able to incorporate those standards as part of the application to elevate the overall architectural character of the interior of the site in consideration of the industrial development design standards that are proposed this evening. Additionally, the amendment only applies to the centrally located parcels in the overall development area. It's important to note that there are new rights of way that are currently under construction and new private roads. This site will be bound by those new rights of way, but again, those primary arterials and highway are on the outside of the site, which those parcels that are adjacent to those arterials and highways are where the commercial design standards still apply. So with the enhanced architectural features in the application of the industrial development standards, staff find that the proposed amendment maintains a compatibility with the intent of the originally entitled ConocoPhillips Campus General Development Plan. And so with that, we received some additional feedback to consider some of the original renderings that the applicant had provided as part of their preliminary plat application. So this is an example of one of the renderings that was originally included, presented to the Planning Commission, City Council, and the community at large. This would be representative of their PUD number 5 application, which PUD 5 would be subject to the commercial development guidelines and standards. Here's another example of that the applicant provided to the community. This is an amenity building that's also part of PUD 5. This is on the south side of the site, by the way. This is the parcel that's southernmost on the site, subject to commercial development design standards and guidelines. You can actually see in the distance in the rendering that the applicant has contemplated utilizing an industrial style building for the industrial style uses that are allowed on the general development plan. Here's another example of an additional PUD that's programmed on the northwest side of the site, which is also subject to the commercial design standards. Again, this is what the applicant presented to the community initially. This particular property, as part of their development concept and program, would meet the commercial design standards. And again, this property would not be, at least as this is rendered, this property would not be subject to the IDDSG or those enhanced standards. It would have to meet the commercial design standards. So here's another quick graphic of the site as it stands now. So PUD 5 is that southernmost blue site with the square in the middle. And then there's another PUD in that further northwest area. That would be the other commercial standard, which was represented in one of the renderings that was presented by the applicant. And then, of course, those two easternmost parcels, one is the hospital, the other is also retained by the applicant, but is still subject to the commercial development standards and guidelines. And then again, just for reference, here is the renderings that were originally provided by the applicant that would satisfy industrial standards with the enhanced architectural treatments. And so the Planning Commission recommended approval of this application with conditions on December 11th. Those conditions were technical in nature and had to do with applying the actual standards to the general development plan and ensuring that that they were specific to lots 1, 2, 3, and 5 of Block 1. And with that, staff recommend approval of Ordinance 20, Series 2026, approving the ConocoPhillips Campus General Development Plan, Second Amendment, to allow the application of enhanced industrial design standards and guidelines on lots 1, 2, 3, and 5 of Block 1, Red Tail Ridge filing number 1. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. Council members, you have questions? Yes, Councilmember Hamilton and Councilmember Fahey, and then Councilmember Cooperman.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first is in reference to the picture the applicant provided that is representative of the enhanced IDDSG. Yeah. So in that particular picture, would you say, in your professional judgment, that that is the minimum for IDDSG, or does this go above and beyond what would be the minimum?
Could I ask a clarifying question? You mean minimum for the IDDSG or
Enhanced.
the enhanced standards?
Yeah, like
Okay.
is this the minimum of the enhanced, or is what we're seeing like a little extra from what would be the potential minimum that could be built there?
I would say that what we're seeing here is a bit extra. So if you look in detail at the standards with some of the corner treatment lengths that we applied, right? We didn't this particular well, the top right corner there, those corner treatments extend longer than the 15 feet that we proposed for enhanced standards. So as far as entry features are concerned, this goes above and beyond the enhanced standards as they're proposed. Yes.
Okay. And I ask that because I'm not a building or design expert, so trying to take what's written on paper and visualize it is very helpful. And knowing that something that this is above and beyond what, in theory, could be built at minimum to meet the standards. My other question is regarding the internal roads. I think you called them the arterial roads. Is that right? What do you call them? The main roads?
Yeah, the
there?
internal roads are collectors and privates. The arterials are the outer roads.
Okay, so these internal roads, you mentioned quite a few items that would be proposed for entryway enhancements and entryways. I mean, there's private drives that could be built, so entryways aren't necessarily going to be facing these main roads, right? Can you remind me or draw my attention to where, if there are any guidelines for the part of the building that would be facing these main roads? Like, are all these upgrades going to be internal to private entryways and it's not even going to affect those driving around there?
Sure,
They'll just
yeah.
see industrial
Sure.
for the most part?
So I think we can start with where the roads are actually going to be established interior to the site. So we have Rockcrest Drive, which is here, Sorrel Avenue, and then Campus Drive. Those are the public rights of way. The way the standards are written right now is that those enhanced entry features, any building facade that is facing one of those public rights of way has to include entry features, and the standards apply if it's facing a public right of way. We specifically didn't include any buffer allowance, right? So for example, other design guidelines, and I think we'll get into this when we get into the RFP, but other design guidelines will actually say, hey, you don't have to meet this design standard if you're 100 feet away from the public street, right? We deliberately chose not to do that just because of, I think what you're getting at here is that as you're navigating the interior of the site, you'll actually see these buildings from the public rights of way. So the standards will apply to all buildings that are facing a facade facing a right of way. We also worked with the applicant to ensure that those apply to the private streets as well, right? So there will be private streets that are constructed here. So one of the private streets, if you can follow my cursor here, will be here in this location. Oh, I'm sorry, here. Here will be a private street. This way, right? There'll be another private street here, another private street here. They'll functionally follow the breakup of the parcel lines. These standards also apply to buildings that are facing those private streets too. So the material variation, the transparency requirement, and the entry feature requirement is really, I think, the big one that kind of separates these enhanced standards that we're proposing from just the baseline industrial district requirements, where we'll have a minimum 20% of those facades have to have the entry feature requirements, and the entry features have to face a public street or a private street.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And that's all for now, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks. Councilmember Fahey?
Thank you. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem just asked most of my questions. The only one remaining is there a height maximum difference between the commercial and the enhanced design or industrial?
There is, actually. I was just writing that down before I came up because I assumed that question would come up. So as of right now, the GDP requires, or rather mandates, height meet the CDDSG requirement, which is 35 feet and up to 40 feet with a mechanical screen. However, the current GDP also does contemplate, notwithstanding the First Amendment that was approved for the hospital, also contemplates heights of up to 65 feet throughout the entire campus, right? So I think when this was originally entitled, it was thought that structures would be built here that would exceed those commercial design standards. Applicants could have pursued those standards through a waiver or an amendment to the GDP. With the IDDSG applying, heights internal to the site will be maxed at 40 feet with mechanical screens up to 50 feet in height. So the height of the building is going from 35 to 40 feet. Height of mechanical screens is going from 42 feet to 50 feet. So there is going to be an increase in overall height that would be permitted internal to the site here, yes, by right, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
And one little question about the enhanced standards. I just don't quite understand what it means. sorry. So in the staff report, it's the one that says building height increase a minimum of 3.5 feet to extend a minimum of 15 feet along each adjoining face. So is that requiring that there is this extension in height along those 15 feet or not? Or am I getting that wrong?
No, you're absolutely right, Councilor Cooperman. So what we're looking for there, and you can see it sort of reflected here in these elevations, where you see this parapet, what we're calling a parapet, that would be subject to the overall height, right? But that would be what we're saying is that on a corner feature, that you have to extend the height of the building so that we get variation in the roof line for additional architectural variability and enhancement. That 3'6" standard that's not above and beyond the 40-foot limitation. They would still have to be underneath that 40-foot requirement, but now they would have an additional architectural detail requirement on a corner that lines up with the enhanced corner treatment standards.
Okay, that's very helpful. And then I had a couple of questions sort of comparing the enhanced industrial guideline or design guidelines to the commercial. So one, during your presentation, you mentioned some features of buildings that are better suited to industrial, like high bays and loading and stuff like that. Are those actually disallowed under the commercial guidelines?
They're not disallowed, but what we were finding in attempting to apply the commercial guidelines were that so there are lots of guidelines within the commercial guidelines. So we have standards that have to be satisfied, and then we have a really, really large amount of guidelines. And I think when you look at that entire design document holistically, when those guidelines are applied, that's when you get variation in roof form, sloping roof forms, articulation in the overall building. And so I think it's a challenge for those high structural bay use types with really significant loading bay facades that would be interior to a site to meet the commercial design guideline standards. And so I think you'll find, at the hearing next week, the applicants will tell you how much friction we had when it came to trying to apply those standards. So
Okay,
yeah,
that's helpful. In the staff report, you emphasize sort of the pedestrian-focused nature of some of these enhancements. And so I'm just curious, are there differences in, I guess, pedestrian infrastructure between the industrial and the commercial? Or
yeah. There are. I would say the commercial design standards maybe have more robust circulatory or circulation standards that are on the site. Mm-hmm. However, both guidelines do have those circulation standards, right? Certain width requirements that are required for sidewalks. One of the larger ones maybe is there's maybe a larger plaza space requirement, which would be like a pedestrian gathering space that applies in the commercial design standards. However, we do also have that standard that exists in the industrial guidelines. So we can apply that standard through the industrial guidelines. Those are required at entry features and entryways. Haven't even necessarily gotten into how that would actually apply, right, when we're looking at the enhanced standards and then also applying the IDDSG. But some of those on-site ground improvements I think are still available through the IDDSG, through the IDDSG with the enhanced standards. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then maybe sort of a general question along the same lines. I mean, how easy would it be to have like just a table that sort of has the enhanced the features of the enhanced guidelines and like how they differ from the commercial guidelines? Is that pretty hard to do, or?
I would say what would make that challenging is what I alluded to previously, which is the guidelines versus the standards in our design guidelines, mm-hmm. where we have this built-in ambiguity, which I think planning manager alluded to, whereas there's just this level of uncertainty. So it would be a challenge. I mean, I could put together a standard column, a guideline column, right? And then basically what would be the enhanced standard column. I think that would probably be the most appropriate, but it's doable, I would say, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I thought I had one little question left. Oh, yeah. So you mentioned a couple PUDs. Are there any PUDs that have been submitted to the city within the pink region?
Yeah, so we are currently under review of PUD number 1, which is in the pink region, which was a catalyst, I think, for what you're seeing this evening. And then, yeah, that's the only PUD we currently have under review.
Okay. And how will that fit in with, say we approve these changes, how will that fit in with the?
Yeah, our review of that PUD will change now. So we've been applying the commercial design standards, and we're at an impasse with the applicant at this point. So if this moves forward, the review of that PUD will continue under this newly adopted amendment.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Kern.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation and actually, quite frankly, all the work that's led up to this, and then bringing us some of the challenges that the developer is finding and you guys are finding hitting these commercial requirements. And thank you, actually, everyone up here too. You guys have asked some excellent, very thoughtful questions, and I'm sure next or when we do the second reading, we'll have some additional ones or comments. I was curious to know, though, how difficult is it, or in your conversations with them, to have the commercial standard applied to just the portions where we're asking for this enhanced industrial to apply where it's facing the roads? Because I'm thinking these are going to be pretty heavily traveled roads by our community members, our residents, whether it's going to and from work or specifically utilizing the hospital and the exposure and view from the hospital campus.
Yeah, I think so that was an approach we tried with the applicant. We've had that PUD that I referenced in review for over a year now, and so we've tried that approach, and I think we, as a staff, and we're not able to find an agreement on how that plays out. What I'll say here is that, again, the commercial standards include so many guidelines that it's hard for us to really enforce them. And again, this alludes to what Jeff was saying previously, where we don't have measurable standards, and so there's a lack of certainty here. So I think what we're trying to do with the enhanced guidelines here are provide measurable, repeatable standards where we can say you're either meeting this standard or you're not. So I think that to answer your question, we attempted that with an applicant. I think what we're finding is that the way that our design guidelines are crafted, it's a challenge to find an agreement on like a commercial facade that supports that industrial use, those high structural bays, so on and so forth. It just gets really complicated from an administration perspective for us to try to do something like that without some sort of additional set of standards.
So the difference really, it sounds like maybe is the 35 to 40 foot height limitation. Is that what we're talking about as their concern here?
No, it's no. So for example, if I'm administering the commercial design guidelines and we're thinking about what we want to see for commercial areas, I want to see articulation in roof form. I want to see horizontal plane articulation. I want to see additional material variation. I want to see pedestrian-oriented development styles, which again are all contemplated and supported by the overall development plan. So it's really a whole building and site-wide challenge, right, to meet the commercial development standards with the uses that they're proposing.
So you were mentioning the height requirement for this new enhanced would be 40 feet, and they're allowed to have another 12 feet, so up to 52 feet to like put screening to hide HVAC, commercial HVAC equipment. Is that what this is?
Yeah, an additional 10 feet up to 50.
50 feet. And
no, I should mention, I'm sorry, Councilor Kern, there is also a setback requirement for that screening, right? So if there's
So like toward
rooftop.
the center.
Yeah, exactly. So if there's rooftop mechanical equipment, there's a 20-foot setback standard that applies. So it functions as a step back to the building facade, 20 feet back. That's where that mechanical will require the screening. That screening can be up to 50 feet tall, 20 feet setback from the building facade, yeah.
So if the height, the new allowance for the additional height was uncomfortable as far as the look and feel of these new standards, especially along Sorrel, because that directly faces that huge hospital campus where I envision a lot of public activity being people lingering, cars, to and from. A lot of our community members will probably come through there. That in these plans, when you look at them, not in the pink and white, but the other overlay that kind of shows an example of where they might be putting their buildings, it's the more of the multicolor. They're showing some setback areas, like almost like a park space. I think I remember in the conversation we had with them before that this seemed true to what they were continuing to present to you. I'm curious if there's still truth in that. And the reason I ask that is kind of what Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton was talking about is those renderings, I think, should represent the minimums, not beyond that. I think if that's what they're showing us they can do, sort of like what we were shown before that they would do, and now they're asking us to change that standard to facilitate some of the functionality, that we update the minimums to reflect that appearance.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So I think I'll start with their site layouts that they originally proposed to us. They are not, those site layouts that they provided to us are in no way binding, right? I think, as you know. So they can meet the setback standards provided by the GDP. They just have to satisfy the coverage limitations, which would apply through the industrial design standards. So the open space, or the space on the private property areas where there is not currently building, those could be reoriented, right? They could change from what is in the staff report. I believe I threw that in the staff report with the permission from the applicant. As far as meeting the minimum standards are concerned here, that that's where staff started as a baseline, right? From the designs, we essentially took the overall elevations that we have here and turned those into quantitative standards, right, that we could measure. Again, just through additional conversations with the applicant, right, we find that based on their user profiles, which they mentioned here previously to you in the concept plan, and I'll let them talk about this more at the second reading, right, trying to find those tenants that will fill these spaces, aerospace uses, biological science uses, research and development uses. They have a certain, obviously a certain financial program that they're trying to satisfy. Not that that's an excuse to not meet a standard. However, we tried to find a middle ground with them specifically with it. But regardless, absolutely hear what you and Councilor Hamilton are saying. That is where we started with the applicant, to be clear.
So I just want to say again, because I really want to make sure that our community members hear this too from me, but hear how hard you have worked on their behalf. So I really, truly, and thank you, because exactly what Sterling Bay, those images that you showed to us, which were the original renderings, that is the expectation that our community has for what will go there. And I realize that's in a different PUD, that's PUD 3, I think, that you're showing us there, the rendering. But the indication had been that that would be what we would be seeing throughout this entire development, and especially in areas that are going to be so heavily used by pedestrians as well as people driving by all around the hospital campus. And I think it was the expectation of Vista as well that it would not be semi-industrial looking. They knew that the option to use for that was there, but not the look. I just want to find out how. Yeah, and I guess you've clarified for me the work you guys have done to try and compel the applicant to meet those initial standards, and this is a compromise to allow for functionality of the space. Is that probably the best way to?
Yeah, I would say so. It's, you know, and I think, you know, to be clear, a lot of what we did with the applicant was we tried to base it on the concept plan conversation as best as we could, right? And so really it's, you know, we were working to find a compromise that would, again, allow for the enhancements, but still pull back from the overall commercial requirements. So we found what we thought was a reasonable middle ground, but obviously willing to, you know, consider any other conversations that we need to based on the feedback that we get tonight. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dickinson.
Yeah, thank you. I think reading over all of the enhanced, what do you call it, sort of descriptions of what it takes to comply. It's why we didn't do it from the dais a couple months ago, right? So some really, really good stuff in there that seems, like you said, while not super easy, it's like 75%. I can measure that. I can look at that. I can say you're at 76 and we can deal with it, right? And so there are a lot of examples of that all across the board that it seemed very, from a developer's perspective, I can measure whether or not I qualify, and they'll look too, but I can look and I can know. I'm not going to go in like, well, it's not quite pretty enough. Like I don't know what to do with that, right? So I think you guys have done a really good job with all of those details, and I hope that that's sort of an example of things to come with our whole code rewrite is being a little bit more clear, and so that everyone can follow. The developer can build what we want them to build, and you guys can analyze it easily without wondering if you're following your own code or not, right? So I think there's some really positive things there. My only concern at the front end was, you know, do you must, but do you guys feel comfortable that you haven't gone too far, right? That is not an industrial building. So it sounds like you guys feel that a developer can build the product they need to build at the price per square foot they would expect to build anywhere else in the state or within a range, and that these standards aren't going to be so high that there's still a problem when you go to apply them, right? So you can, I'll ask one more thing, you can kind of answer all at once, but then the question is, you know, can you remind us what their rights are to say, yeah, it's supposed to be 15 feet, we came back with 14, but here's why. Can we get, you know, approval for a variance of the code to have 14 feet instead of 15 feet, or to have, as you were alluding to, 60 feet instead of 50 feet, and here's how and why. So they'll still have an ability to get through staff to council with some variances, right?
You know, we didn't, I'll answer the latter part of that question first. We didn't include specific language that would support the waiver process for them in this. The waiver language is in there for the commercial design standards. We didn't include that in the GDP amendment language here. So that can be in addition. So to your point, if they do come in with just 14 feet or they're under the transparency standard, that's a no-go. They'd have to amend the general development plan in order to move forward with that again. So that's something we can work on if we feel like we want to add that flexibility to it. The first part of your question there, you know, I will admit, obviously, we only talked to one specific developer when it came to applying these standards. We felt we were we presented a reasonable approach that would be, again, repeatable and enforceable for other users as well, beyond just the current applicant. That was kind of our goal, as well as if ownership changes at all on these parcels, can we ensure that we get the same development product that we intended to get? We'd probably have to engage in some sort of deeper feasibility study to determine, you know, what that actually looks like, you know, from a build out perspective. But I think we felt we found a decent compromise with them based on what was presented here so far, understanding the commercial design guidelines applied originally.
Yeah, and my understanding is you guys looked at, say, you know, generally a building that you think we would be happy with, because we had that kind of awkward conversation, like, well, enhanced, but not so far. Like, okay, what would be a building that would make them happy? And then how do I measure things that would accomplish those goals, breaking up the long things, having cooler corners, all that stuff, and then put numbers to all that. Obviously, that didn't take hours. That took days and weeks to try to analyze all that. But that's kind of the intent, right, is that your minimum code as written, if someone built to that minimum code, you believe the product would make this body pretty happy.
I would say that we believe that the enhancements through the architectural standards are an enhancement to what's in the IDDSG right now. They're above and beyond what would otherwise apply in the IDDSG.
Yeah.
I think that's our position, right? So if the IDD just applied straight across the board, right? What we have through here is an enhancement. I'll use that word again. Is a verifiable enhancement beyond what we currently have in the industrial design standards.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Guess I'm the only one who's still here asking. I've got a couple of questions. There was comment earlier about sort of functional reasons for wanting something from this particular owner, something that is less than the commercial guidelines. But it's also financial. I mean, that was a concern that they've raised, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think
it's a primary concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we've generally heard, that that imposing the higher commercial standard would potentially limit their ability to be able to put somebody in there, right? Now, that's not, I mean, at some level, that's the owner's responsibility, but I think as a policy matter, it's something we have to take into consideration. I guess, and I wonder whether in putting together the ordinance, you've had what you believe to be sort of sufficient input from, not just from this particular owner that we're kind of discussing, but other owners in the parcel, or in the ConocoPhillips general development plan?
We haven't had the opportunity to engage any other owners. I'm not aware of any other owners of the interior parcels at this point, outside of the current applicant. We did, however, as a staff, I think we leaned on our collective experience a bit to, apply what was reasonable and what we've seen elsewhere, both here in the city and then regionally.
And is, one of the reasons why we're doing this, to avoid these discussions with every PUD that might result in potential friction because we're doing something with one that we're not doing with another. I mean, overall, that is why we're doing this, right? Or why you've proposed it. And I do appreciate that. I think it bears some repeating. With that, I'm gonna make a motion, and then we can talk further about it. I'm gonna move that ordinance number 1912, series 2026, pass on first reading, and the public hearing be set for Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026 at 6 p.m.
Second.
Okay. Do we have discussion about that motion? Councilmember Kern.
I appreciate that. So I guess it's somewhat of a procedural question too for everyone. So where will there be, or are there opportunities for us to reevaluate some of the standards that are in here? Like perhaps that the minimums do need to match, like if you guys are able to do measurements type on the renderings, match that, versus we have no idea what a minimum will look like because we haven't seen any renderings of that minimum. We saw a rendering that feels like it should be the minimum. So at what point in this can we have that conversation that maybe those kinds of standards need to be changed for this? And down the road, when they bring us the actual PUD and they have the site layout with the different buildings, there are opportunities there for us to request from the developer maybe different design standards for the exterior of the buildings that are specific to the Avista campus versus to one of their interior roads.
I'm going to let staff address that. I think they're.
Yeah, I'll just say, obviously, if this moves forward as it's proposed now, it'll be entitled through the general development plan document in perpetuity, essentially. I guess we'll have to determine how we address GDPs with our code updates. Do you want to expand on that, Robert?
No, but I think what you're asking is if tonight council can give direction for any changes. I mean, you can technically, if council wants to direct changes, you can do that on first reading, or you can wait till second reading and hear all the public input and the applicant's presentation and then direct changes once you have the full gamut of information. But you can really do either.
With time being consideration, what is your opinion on that?
I think we should just need to get it right. I think we need to get it right. So if there's a consensus of council that feels strongly that they want to make a change to the ordinance, they can direct that at first reading. But in most cases, it's probably better to go to second reading and hear the full gamut of information. And then if council wants to direct changes at that time, that might slow the process. But I think it's more important to get it right and make sure council's comfortable with it.
Okay. I like the idea of getting it right.
Well, one suggestion might be to ask for additional information. I mean, that's one of the things that we do. I think that's consistent with passing the motion as we have. But and the other is to request an amendment, and you can do it as a friendly amendment, and we can see where we go for that. Or provided that we have, that's the kind of issue that I think, you can think about that for just a second if you want, or you can propose something. If I think it would be, it's good to get information regardless.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like reaching out, getting additional information that can be provided at the full hearing might be the better way to go.
I think one of the things we can do is we can measure the actual rendering and show you differences. So we could do a comparison of what's being proposed versus what's actually on the rendering and show you the differences, and that might help inform the second reading discussion.
That would be good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anyone else with a comment?
I think Councilmember Cooperman did.
Councilmember Cooperman?
I was just going to suggest something very similar, which would be, could we ask for a mock-up very much like that one, but just at the minimum of the standards?
I think that would be much more difficult to do, that we would rely on the applicant to do that, and it would take a pretty big effort with one of their design consultants. But we could ask them if council as a whole would like that.
And I would suggest, on that one, I would suggest proposing an amendment. I mean, because that's a bigger thing than just getting further information, if you like. Okay. I think we've had the
Mayor Lay.
discussion, unless there's, yes, I'm sorry.
City Attorney Kelly had her hand up.
Oh, good. Yes.
Good evening. Sorry I'm not there with you in person. I raised my hand, but Rob answered Councilmember Kern's question exactly as I was going to, so I lowered it.
Thank you for following closely, too. We appreciate that, always. So why don't we take roll call? And just to make it clear, it's consistent with the request that Councilmember Kern has made for additional information. I mean, that's not a conflict or need of an amendment, I don't think. It's just part of the direction we're giving you in addition to offering the decision.
May I ask one clarifying question on the request for information? You're looking for a comparison of the renderings that were provided and shown here tonight versus what is proposed for adoption, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So that we can have a better understanding of what that represents, what that standard would read as.
Okay. Go ahead and take the roll call, please.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Cooperman,
Yes.
Councilmember Kern,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton,
Yes.
Mayor Lay,
Yes.
Councilmember Fahey.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for all the hard work, and we'll see you on February 3rd at 6 p.m. All right. We got Councilmember Hefner. We'll let him get into place again. All right, our next item is ordinance number 1913, Series 2026, an emergency ordinance, amending the fire hardening code for structures in Chapter 15.70 of the Louisville Municipal Code. This is a public hearing. Tonight, we've got an emergency ordinance, which means we'll be holding the public hearing this evening. That's the difference between it's one of the differences between an emergency ordinance and a regular one. 2/3 of the council members need to vote affirmatively for the emergency ordinance to pass, which is 5, I believe. And so if we're ready to go, I think that's the other big difference between an emergency and a regular ordinance. So I'm going to open the public hearing. Is there any disclosures on this that people need to make or feel they need to make? Okay. We have a staff presentation from the Director of Community Development.
Good evening, Mayor Lay, members of City Council, Rob Zucchero, Community Development Director. Apologies, I don't have a PowerPoint for this, so I thought I would just go through the actual ordinance that's being proposed here. So as you know, in December, City Council asked for an emergency ordinance to be brought before Council to ban junipers due to their some of their unique properties in relation to fire spread. They have resins and different properties that make them catch fire more easily and burn hotter than other types of vegetation. So part of our efforts on structure hardening, the thought was to have this ban come forward and have it as emergency ordinance. Since there are properties under construction, there'll be properties installing landscaping as those finish, so it was important to move it forward quickly. Staff did take the opportunity to make some other amendments to the structure hardening code as we've been implementing this for a few months. We wanted to propose some amendments that only strengthen the structure hardening code and provide clarification. They're not intended to lessen the code in any way, so I'll go over those. I'll go over those first and then talk about the juniper ban. So we have the amendments here, as you can see. One is for our structure hardening code. We reference in a lot of the construction standards for the materials that they have a maximum flame spread rating of 25. What we found, and that's typically you think of Class A materials. And what we found as we've been implementing some of these permits is you can get a flame spread of 25 or less in those ratings, but they don't actually meet the Class A. And that's because there's a smoke development index that's part of Class A, which is also doesn't contribute to fire spread, but it is definitely a life safety issue with the smoke index. So we would like to change that from a maximum flame spread rating of 25 or less to a Class A rating, meeting an ASTM E84 or UL 723 standard. So that'll include both the flame spread and the smoke development ratings. The second part of that is we've had a lot of requests for treated building materials. There's a lot of applications you can make to different materials. that are Class A treatments, but they tend to only last maybe a year to 3 or 4 or 5 years at the most, depending on the application, without reapplying that material. We feel like that would be very difficult to enforce over time, the reapplication process, and they would lose their effectiveness. So we also added that you could still use treated building materials, but the applicant would have to demonstrate that it would last for the life of the material without reapplication. So there might be some pressure-treated materials that will last the life, but there's also spray-on or paint-on materials that have to be reapplied, and so those would not be allowed. So that would strengthen the code. So we're proposing those with some other clarifications there. And then to the juniper ban, so that's section 151740. And it's pretty straightforward, but it's really prohibiting the planting or installation of any juniper species. And this would be citywide, applied citywide. Any existing junipers could be maintained, but they couldn't be replanted or relocated, or if they needed to be replaced, they would have to be replaced with the non-juniper species. And so that's how we've drafted it for proposal here for the public hearing. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Council questions? Yes, Councilmember Kern, and then Councilmember Cooperman.
Actually, it's not a question. I have a comment, so I'll wait.
Okay, thanks. Councilmember Cooperman.
Thank you. I was going to ask a question about, whether we know of these treatments that can be applied to materials that actually do last a lifetime. And so it sounds like there are some. Are there many, or are we really excluding most of these treatments? Can you give us a sense for that?
So I do know that there are some treated materials that will maintain their Class A rating. We've seen some submitted. So most of my knowledge is just what we've seen submitted. I haven't really surveyed everything that's available in the market. So I do know that they exist. It's usually easier to use like a cement board siding, but for design purposes, if somebody finds something, it's probably pretty expensive, but if they find it and it actually is rated, we would want to allow that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine. And then maybe just one other question. What are our current thoughts about enforcement, particularly of the juniper ban?
Yeah, so I think a big part of that's going to be communication. So, if this passes, assuming it passes, we will be communicating to all, having a lot of citywide communications, and we will have targeted communication to the rebuild area specifically, to the developers and homeowners that are still building, to make sure that they are aware of it. We hadn't anticipated requiring landscaping plans on the remaining building permits that we have, but we do intend to, notate those plans and inform very clearly when we're issuing those plans that when they do their landscaping, that they aren't allowed to use junipers in their landscaping. So I think there's a kind of a citywide communications approach, and then how we will be notifying future permit holders and existing permit holders that are still under construction.
Thank you.
Other council members have, yes, Councilmember.
Yeah, I guess so there won't be a landscaping permit, or we're not changing the way in which someone applies for a permit for a building.
We weren't anticipating it for this ordinance, because it's just a juniper ban. If, for example, if we had defensible space standards, it might be advisable to do a landscaping plan because it's a little more complex. But just for a juniper ban, we weren't expecting to review all landscaping just to see if there were junipers included.
Okay, so there's no additional process necessarily for the applicant when they're coming in for a building code. They don't have
Right.
to provide a landscaping plan.
Yeah.
You just might ask them are you planning on planting any junipers? They say yes, like, you're not allowed to, there's a ban. Or just a reminder, you're not allowed to, there's a ban, but they don't have to submit what they are planting.
Yeah, not for single-family development. This would apply to commercial development as well, and we do review landscaping plans, so we would be implementing it when we review those landscape plans. But for single-family, we weren't anticipating that we were. We're open
Yeah.
if we feel like that's a better way to implement it.
Yeah, and then my second question is just, I think it's pretty straightforward with new builds. I mean, there's nothing there, and anything they plant is obviously new. But, the other 9,000 structures in our city, like, how do we propose to even know, let alone enforce, someone plants a juniper bush in their backyard behind a fence? Like, it's illegal, like, it's not allowed, but what is the way in which we would know? And I assume most people won't even know, right? They don't know who half their council people are. They certainly don't know about the ban on a particular plant when they went to the store to just buy a plant, right? So if they're in the know, then they know. But if they don't know and they just plant a juniper, what's the plan for enforcing that rule?
Yeah, so I think there's challenges with that, especially for existing development. So I think, again, communication is going to be really key to get as high of a compliance rate as we can get. I think when we have ordinances like these, our philosophy is if we become aware of it, we need to enforce the ordinance. So whether that comes in through a complaint or our code enforcement officer notices that somebody's planting junipers, then we do our best to enforce the ordinance as it's written. I would also note, just going back a little bit on the new developments, a lot of homes will get their certificates of occupancy and complete the construction process and won't install landscaping for weeks or months or even over a year sometimes. So again, we don't want to, necessarily, we're not in a position where we want to hold up people getting their certificates or trying to track temporary certificates for landscaping plans either.
I have just one question. Have you? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's actually a follow-up on the communication and the plan in making sure that the community knows. But I was also that maybe the vendors, whether that's landscape companies that supply or the plant vendors locally, the Home Depots, the Lowe's, for the simple for simple purchases locally, for somebody who's just putting it in an existing yard, for example. I see them a lot at the stores. Is there a way for us to inform them so that they're aware that if you're buying this to put on a Louisville property, we will be enforcing that ban?
Yeah, we could definitely notify anybody that we're aware of that we have this ban, and then, of course, that company will do what they want with that information. Some may communicate that. I did hear anecdotally, for example, when we required the Class A decks, the local Home Depot, when people were buying decking material, they were trying to give them a heads up because they didn't want people to spend all that money and get in a bind. So I expect some of the vendors will kind of, do their best to try to communicate that. But of course, they'll be selling to residents in surrounding jurisdictions where they aren't banned. So I imagine it'll be difficult for them to, ask for, their people's IDs to see where they live and those types of things.
Right. And I do appreciate actually you commenting about reaching out to people who are in permit now or are still in the build process who haven't had the COO. Is it too big of a task to send that to anybody who even received their COO, let's say in the last year? Like you said, there's a lot of planting that doesn't get done immediately or during construction. It can take like a year or so after. Just so that they're aware of the new requirement?
Yeah, we have a pretty
homeowner?
broad email list for Marshall Fire Rebuild, so I think it's very easy to craft the communication just to say, even if you've already completed your landscaping, if you're adding additional landscaping, also please be aware.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Just a clarification, Councilmember Kern, you're not suggesting an amendment to that effect, right? Okay. Anyone else? Yes. Councilmember Fahey.
I just have one quick question. For future discussion, would it be possible to ban the sale of junipers in the city limits? Because in order for Home Depot to have junipers to sell, they have to have them on their property, which is usually outside. So I think just for a future conversation, maybe. But that wouldn't apply to tonight at all, so, sorry.
I mean, if you're interested in adding that as amendment, you can certainly add it to, or move to add it to the ordinance. I had a question going back to the part of this that deals with treated building materials. Do you have an idea of how many folks, say, within the community, the fire survivor community, have used the temporary material that is, I presume it's a brush on or something like that, that, that would, I don't know, well, actually, let me ask it a different way first. Let's say that there is a person who has used a temporary treatment, and, presumably they would probably use a temporary treatment again when it became necessary to do that. But how would they be treated under this? I mean, would they be grandfathered in for doing it for all purposes, or would it?
Yeah.
They end up having to comply just down the road?
So I think only if they replaced something, only if they replaced, a structure that they had treated, which presumably they put in before the ordinance was in effect.
Okay.
We haven't, just to be clear, we haven't been allowing by practice, but we wanted to reinforce it with the ordinance to make it clear. But there could be structures that were put in before the ordinance was in effect, and if they're treating it, they're grandfathered in before this ordinance was in effect, and only if they replace that structure would they then have to come into compliance with the code.
Right. You say it's not been necessarily, I don't know the right word here. People haven't been violating any standard by using those, by using those materials, right?
No, no. I think early on when we started implementing this ordinance, the issue quickly came up, and we have been implementing it that the rated treatments wouldn't be allowed because they don't last the life of the material. So we've been not allowing them with that argument, but I think putting this language in the code reinforces that practice.
Understood. Any other comment, question? All right. Why don't we get a motion?
Public
I'm
comment.
sorry. Of course, because it's a one-shot deal. Yes, public comment on this one. Thank you.
We have Tanya Samaru.
So, hi, I want to say thank you for bringing this ordinance forward. And one thing about those treatments you're discussing, they are so toxic. Another reason they're not a great idea. So about the junipers, I just want to say, this is forward-looking for new junipers that would be planted. And in my experience, people believe that every piece of landscaping has like a little spirit in it. They are very emotionally connected to the stuff they plant. And once they plant it, it's really hard to talk people into removing it. So it's really important to just prevent more harmful fuels from being planted within areas of the city where we would want to reduce risk. And this emergency ordinance is great. It's going to be very helpful in my neighborhood to go talk to the builders and say, hey, you're just aware of this, right? Or new people who move in. Just so you know, we're Firewise and we have this ordinance. And we also don't have permits for chickens, but we still have chicken rules and chickens. So it's helpful to still have it. I don't know if everyone realizes that, like, burning junipers around the police station were a big reason why the police station was evacuated during the Marshall Fire. And if you talk to one of the firefighters who saved the neighborhood to the east of Fireside Elementary, 3 firefighters and a Type 3 engine, including Ben Carter, they were driving around putting out fires in junipers and landscaping like that. There are other plants that are in this category, like cypress, and I think I sent a list, because they're very flammable, full of resin, and they don't have clearance to the ground. I'm not exactly sure people plant them here, but I added the list just as a possible amendment. So, yeah. I think everyone understands we're not asking people to remove their landscaping. It's very important to understand that. If that comes to be that it's really important for the goals of the city to do that, that's a different discussion. And, you know, it's just better not to have it in the first instance. So thank you very much. And I hope you will approve. I hope you will vote for the ordinance. Thank you.
Yeah, let me make sure are there any other, is there any other public comment? Okay, let's come back to council. Yes, Councilmember Kern.
Thank you. So I really do appreciate this, appreciate the work that that Rob and his team put into this. And I think this is in direct response to a lot of the science that we've been hearing for the last 4 years since the Marshall Fire happened on a lot of preventive measures, and the action of our community members and fire department as well, and hearing the stories. I think we have more to do, and we will have more conversations coming up when we talk in depth about the WUI as to whether we want to extend it to other plants or other perimeters. I think this is a very good start. And I do believe that the community members in Louisville would appreciate that this is absolutely a public safety measure. And we hear over and over again how important it is that community safety is paramount, and this is right up there with maintaining the safety of the city. So with that, I actually propose a passage of Ordinance 1913, Series 2026. Do we need another round before I do that? Oh, sorry.
Second.
We need a second round of public comment because it's an ordinance.
Yeah, go ahead.
I started that.
Yeah, sorry. I just fell into your trap. All right, do we have any other public comments or council comments? Well,
Dramatic. Yeah, so, the first comment I have about this is, well, I'll say, have no problem banning junipers from being planted. I don't think it's a problem at all. I'm not super excited that we have an emergency ordinance in front of us, just as a council, conversation. I don't think we've done very many emergency ordinances in my 6 years, and they've been, COVID or the actual Marshall Fire or something like that. And so using the emergency ordinance for, banning juniper bushes from being planted on new properties is, going to maybe have an effect on maybe a handful of properties, maybe in a few months, because it's January, right? So I think this could have come after the WUI. This could come in kind of a normal cadence. But it's sort of a moot point because here we are talking about it, so I don't want to belabor it. But that sort of small impact on new properties is also, it's like, I'm fine with this. It actually reminds me a little bit of dark side lighting conversation where I don't know this is going to have the impact we really want, but I'm fine with it. It's like, I don't know that this is going to have the impact we're really wanting, but I'm fine with it. I don't have a problem with the juniper ordinance or ban. But I think we'd have a lot more impact if we were doing something like, free removal of juniper bushes. So think about there's thousands of them in our community. So instead of preventing 5 new ones from being planted, potentially, if you said, hey, we'll cut them out for free. Now that's a financial thing. It's a bigger conversation and maybe something we want to look into, but just the level of impact that this is going to have. And then when it comes to this entire ordinance and amendment or emergency ordinance with some amendments to our hardening code, I still have a major issue with this being a citywide hardening code, a citywide ban. I think that we are studying maps and developing maps and trying to understand through scientists and data risk factors of where things, like where the rules should apply. And we haven't finished that process, but I was opposed to the citywide home hardening ordinance for the same reason. I don't know that we need just citywide action on all of these things necessarily, but I could see like in the WUI, Class A, in the interior parts, maybe Class C, or, I could see us figuring out where those things play out. So the fact that this is, again, a citywide ordinance and it's not really taking into account where we're high risk of fire or not is still hard for me to stomach. And like I said, going all the way to the highest standard, and now even like if there's any confusion, highest of the highest standard, you can't even do an application that gets you to Class A. You have to, it's the people I talk to, like a new deck is 3 to 4 times the cost of a deck. And they were $10,000 to $20,000 for a deck. You're just like, oh my goodness, the financial impact this is having on people who are actively trying to build a deck. And when the financial impact is so large, then you get cheaters. And I sort of understand that. It's like, well, I'm just gonna see if I can build this deck without telling anyone. So then people aren't following the rules, and then you have other issues when you've made something so financially difficult to adhere to. So I still have a concern over all of it. And then again, even if it goes through and you do it, then how do we even enforce it, right? So it's like, we don't really know how we're going to enforce it. It's not going to have a huge effect. Maybe shouldn't be citywide. So I'm really excited to continue the WUI conversation, and I will end with what I started with. I have no problem banning juniper bushes from planting. I don't have a problem with that piece of the conversation, but I don't support the entirety of the ordinance and the other hardening aspects of it.
Since you've raised a process point, I wanted to address it because emergency ordinances aren't like other ordinances. And we talked about a couple of the differences, but one of the things that's also different is you have to state within the ordinance what the emergency is. And there is a statement like that. And it is, I thought I would just read it so folks don't have to follow it. The section of the code is section 412 sub B, which says an emergency ordinance shall take effect, pardon me. No, it's sub A. The facts showing the emergency shall be specifically stated in the ordinance. So what it says, and it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th whereas clause, whereas the city council finds that an emergency exists because given the extreme fire conditions recently experienced in the city and surrounding areas, the preservation of public property, health, safety, and welfare requires the cities to take immediate action to minimize fire risk within the city. From my standpoint, because I do want to get something in the record beyond that, we've had quite a number of red flag days in the last month, and maybe more than we've had before. I think we're going to have more coming given the lack of snowpack. So I think those conditions are important. Another condition, of course, is the wind, which we've had really heavy wind recently, and wind that I know with respect to people in the community have reminded them all too much of the wind that came right during the Marshall Fire. I also know, I guess the other thing, and it's not stated in here, but it has to do with health, safety, and welfare, is that we know that in particular areas of the city, particularly in the burn areas, there are plantings that are going in there. And so it's not a theoretical concern. I think it's something that exists. So I just wanted to mention that because I think you mentioned it, and I think what you said are entirely appropriate points to be making. I don't personally agree with them on this, but they're reasonable, points to raise. Are there other comments? Yes, Councilmember Cooperman.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to build a little bit on what Councilmember Dickinson was saying. I also don't really understand why we're considering this as an emergency ordinance, notwithstanding what the mayor just volunteered. I just wanted to say a few things about it. So, first of all, there is that whereas clause that the mayor read to us. I'm not keeping statistics, but I feel like, we've had similar conditions in the past 4 years. So it's, it could well be that we've had more red flag warnings this time around, but we've had similar conditions on other years. So it doesn't seem to me like that's the greatest of justification. Maybe another way to put it, in a sense, maybe this ordinance is sort of overdue, and yet in another sense, it's not. The sense in which it's overdue is that, it's been more than 4 years since the Marshall Fire, and we haven't done anything on these issues, whereas maybe we probably should have before. On the other hand, right, this is coming to us now, and from my perspective, I think we should just have this conversation with the larger discussion about WUI and defensible space. I don't think we should have it. I don't think we should be making a decision right now. And just a number of the things that are on my mind. I think, as was mentioned, people are not doing plantings right now, right? And we're supposed to wrap up our WUI, I think, before the planting season. So I'm not too concerned about new junipers going in the meantime. A couple other things. The packet has very little information, and I understand that it's an emergency ordinance, so it's prepared on short notice. And that might be why there's not very much information, but there's not very much there. And sort of as a contrast, Boulder, I think, recently banned junipers or planting new junipers throughout the city. They organized a whole working group to discuss this issue over a period of time and then to ultimately make a decision. And I don't feel like we've had any kind of process like that. And then let me just speak to the other provisions in the emergency ordinance. So we've had limited conversations about a couple of the issues that are trying to be addressed with those other bits in the emergency ordinance. I personally did not know that those were coming in the emergency ordinance until I opened the packet. I thought it was just going to be an emergency ordinance about junipers. So, it's an emergency ordinance, but I don't think it's appropriate that a council member wouldn't know what is coming in an emergency ordinance before opening the packet. And yeah, so I would just like to see some more process around these issues. And I feel like we have that basically planned. And so I don't see why we can't just wait and have the discussion then. And in that process, I would like us, particularly on the juniper ban, to get feedback from the Parks and Public Landscaping Advisory Board. Unless there's some very compelling arguments, I do not plan to vote in favor of this ordinance tonight.
Other council members? Yes, Councilmember Kern.
So I would agree with a couple of Councilmember Cooperman's statements, particularly in the fact that we as a council have been exceptionally remiss in taking care of our community that nearly burned to the ground. And if by the grace of God, the winds had not stopped and we did not have an amazing fire department, the entire city would have burned. Let's look at Lahaina. Let's look at LA. Let's look at downtown Superior. It is gone. We have dozens of families in Old Town Superior who will never live here again because of this. And this is 4 years too late, right? We are a couple of weeks past the anniversary. You're right. The council should have 4 years ago said, let's make this community safer for everybody who is remaining in all the houses that are remaining, let alone get a community that is safer for the rebuild. People are investing their life savings into rebuilding and rejoining this community. They are continuing to raise their families here with a lot of additional help and therapy to focus through high wind days and things. So you are correct. This is long overdue, Councilmember Kupelman, 100% long overdue, and it is not enough. And I'm grateful for Rob to make some very simple clarifying remarks. And quite frankly, I would love to see the 5-foot perimeter of defensible space be in this emergency inclusion, because the neighborhood that Tanya Summerer was mentioning is also my neighborhood. My house burned that day. I was in it when the flames came, sir. And I will tell you right now that had these ordinances been in place, there might have been a chance that Deb's neighborhood wouldn't have burned mine to the ground. The embers that were the size of my fist would not have been implanted in the trees. They would not have been around the junipers around my neighbor's house. I would not have had to go in and rescue her dogs. 3 dogs that day. I left my cars running in the street to go in and save her and her family, her animals. I don't want anybody dealing with this in our community again. And I guarantee you, had we been able to do this, had this been the advice given to Lahaina when they had their first fire, because let's remember, it was their second wildfire that burned their town to the ground. And I will apologize. I am sorry for being quite emotional. I didn't kind of expect this intense of a reaction, but I am sitting here because of the passion that I feel for the people in this town. And this is a big piece of that safety, is making sure that we know, we learn from the mistakes, we learn from the environment, we know what's going on, and we say, this is a simple step to help us be safe as a community. And I am so grateful for the amazing team that we have. And actually, the Parks and Recs department has already done, as a staff, based on recommendations, they have removed junipers from public areas. So I'm pretty sure that our Parks and Public Landscape Board is fully aware of that as well, and has been part of that conversation over the last 4 years. So there are people, experts within this community that are already doing it. And as far as like referencing a whole working group, that's a pretty good working group. We've also had a lot of advice. Why not learn from also Boulder and what they chose to do? They didn't burn, but those community members and everybody involved in that working group sees the concern, sees the danger. We don't have to constantly redo everything. We can learn from some of what our neighbors are doing, and they can learn from us, hopefully. So this is why I believe, and I am grateful that we have the capacity to put something in an emergency standards. I would love to have seen this done before every single new build went in. And I mean, there are several in the neighborhood where there are dozens, not just like 2, dozens of junipers in people's neighborhoods, and they're right up against a wooden fence because we didn't put that hardening policy in place in time either. And I will be concerned if there is another fire for the neighbors behind them, because that's going to just explode up if they don't fix it. So I am in full support and really, really recommend that we let our community members know that their safety is paramount to us as a council, and approve this tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilmember Fahey.
I will echo everything that Councilor Kern just said, and also emphatically support Boulder's decision to ban junipers. They did the research that was necessary to find out if it was an effective thing to do. Why do we have to duplicate that work? We know we should not have junipers, so let's get rid of them.
Yeah, I want to add, Councilor.
I mean, just a short comment. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we need to duplicate Boulder's work, but, you know, like the staff report could have just referenced their work, for instance, but it doesn't. Like, it doesn't have almost any information about, junipers and fires. And I don't know why exactly, but that's basically how it is. So anyway.
And I'll throw my 2 cents in here. First, I adamantly support this as an emergency ordinance. I kind of said before of what the ordinance itself says about the emergency. I think this is where it's sort of an interesting point about what we bring to the table here. It's not a quasi-judicial proceeding. We don't have to limit ourselves to the information that was in the packet. We have had oodles of information, oodles being a legal term of art, but lots of information over 4 years that talked about the danger of this particular plant. The ordinance is, I agree that it's way overdue. I also agree, it's, Boulder's acting preemptively. They haven't had the fire that we did. I think that's interesting. I am mindful of what happened in Lahaina because they could have decided to do a variety of things after the first fire, and I think plenty of people in Lahaina regret that. And they did have that second event, and that stunk. And they're still recovering from it. The final, I guess, 2 final things. I think this is a narrowly tailored ordinance. I don't think it's, I think it's the kind of ordinance that we wanted with maybe one exception. I appreciate Councilmember Koopman, the comment about the treated building materials and all of that, which is an add from the discussion we had before, wanting to have this ordinance. I'm not sure, while I think that it's perfectly fine included in here, I think it does take away a little bit from the urgency. I think there's more urgency. It's not that I feel like there's not enough urgency. I just believe there's more urgency with respect to the juniper ban. I wanted to throw out before we do a motion whether it makes any difference to council members if we eliminated that set of changes to the ordinance. I could enumerate them. I'm not going to right now. I think it's a concept, and we could do that if we choose to propose an amended or ask for a friendly amendment. But I'm very interested in whether council members, whether that would make a difference to anyone, or either for or against. It may be that people feel even less, they don't like that at all. But I am interested if there is any traction on that. I'd like to find out. Council member,
Yeah, I'm supportive of the juniper ban and not of the hardening aspects. Of course, I like the third bullet point, which says, oh gosh, you can use stone.
yeah, maybe, Councilmember Kern, and then Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton. I'm really trying.
Thank you.
Hard to get used to that for verbal purposes here. Go ahead.
I think there's no harm in leaving this in here. And if anything, as people are in the process of moving forward, and we're still, months from in-depth WUI code additional WUI conversations, I think especially some of the clarifying points to say, as long as it's a non-combustible material, it's kind of common sense, but now it is spelled out. That was a smart thing to just put in here, since we're updating essentially that portion of our code.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem? Got it. Anlington, and then Councilmember Hefner and Councilman Cooperman, did you? Okay. Go ahead.
So this went to the Building Code Board of Appeals on January 14th, and their agenda included both Juniper's and the building code updates being proposed tonight.
Yes, they saw the whole package, and they did vote 2-1 to recommend approval. The one member who voted against, which is mentioned in the staff report, wasn't voting against because of the Juniper ban. They were concerned about the availability of supply and cost of decking related to just having a Class A requirement for decking.
Right, I appreciate that. And the reason why I ask is, for me, I'm fine with it as is. I've known for a week that this was part of what the Building Code Board of Appeals was reviewing, and so I'm fine moving forward as is tonight.
Yes, Councilmember Hefner.
Yeah, I'm in the same camp. I mean, what I understood from the presentation is we've been enforcing the Class A requirement and stamping it on all the plans. So having a code that matches what's being done in practice seems to me to be an obvious thing to do, especially if we went to the Building Code Board of Appeals.
Trying to think how to ask this question of council. As to those folks who are, happy with the ordinance as it is, which is not everybody, but happy with the ordinance as it is, are there particular objections to taking out the changes primarily to section 1570.020, which are those relating, and 020 and 030. I'm just interested in that piece.
Could we take our second round of public comment before we answer you?
It's not, yeah, we did.
No, we did not.
Already, yeah.
We went back to council. We never did the second round of public comment, actually.
It's an emergency ordinance. I think we have, oh, no. I am really falling down. We should have, we probably ought to go back. I thought.
We did.
We did,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I thought there was no comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
I would actually make a motion that we pass the ordinance as written, that we pass ordinance 1913, series 2026, an emergency ordinance and amending the fire hardening code for structures in chapter 15.70 of the Louisville Municipal Code.
Second.
I'm going to offer, I'm going to offer a friendly amendment, which I think is timely right now. And the friendly amendment would be to take out the pieces that relate to 15.
Mayor, if you don't mind, I'm one of the people that's probably going to vote no. I think you have 5 votes of the full thing. I don't know why, but you can carry on.
Okay, well, with that in mind, why don't we, are there any further comments? I'll withdraw the half a motion that I made. Any other comments? All right. Let's get a roll call.
Councilmember Hefner?
Yes.
Councilmember Kern?
Yes.
Councilmember Cooperman?
No.
Councilmember Fahey?
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson?
No.
Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Yes.
Mayor Lay?
Yes. Okay. Emergency ordinance passes. Thank you for a very spirited discussion, and we'll have other issues that we can discuss in a few weeks. So it is now 8:11. I'd like to take a break. Just wanted to do a time check. We have got ordinance number 1914, and we've got the council work plan, and discussion direction on upcoming agenda items, of course, and the ever-present city attorney's report. Are there concerns? Yes, council.
I'd like to suggest we handle the ordinance, which is time sensitive, and then wrap up.
What others? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways?
Hear from staff the impact that that could have. I just want to understand timing.
So timing-wise, we do have a special meeting next week in which we have a presentation from the Cultural Services Director, but that is the only item on the agenda at this point in time. If you wanted to move the work plan discussion to next week, we can do that, as well as the discussion related to upcoming agenda items.
Great, that sounds terrific. Let's do that. Let's take a quick break, though. If
all we have left is item D, I don't know that we need a 5-minute break for a 5-minute.
Let me ask, if one person wants to take a break, I'm fine with it. Okay, we'll slam through, I'm fine. Just trying to be sensitive to the time, because we've had a spirited conversation, as I said. All right, so next, ordinance number 1914, Series 2026, contract for the lease and purchase of real estate, 1155 Pine Street. This is a first reading to set public hearing. So again, we're not going to take public comment. We're just, we'll have a discussion for the purpose of offering any amendments and seeking any additional information. With that, City Manager Langley, it's your floor.
Good evening. So let's lighten the mood a little bit and talk about train cars. And so the item before you tonight for first reading is an ordinance to purchase a portion of 1155 Pine Street, which is at the entrance to downtown Louisville at Highway 42 and Pine Street. And so the current owners, the Ramos family, came forward with a proposal to the city for the opportunity to purchase either the entire property or a portion of. And so staff is recommending purchasing the portion of which the train car, the caboose, and the boxcar are located. The proposed purchase price is $396,000. That's based upon land value, the cost to move the train cars to that site, as well as an appraisal of the train cars. It's a lease purchase agreement. It's going to take time to do a subdivision plat for the property. And so the proposal is to do a deposit of $150,000 and then pay a monthly lease payment until the subdivision plat is completed, at which time ownership would transfer to the city. The intent would be that we are purchasing the train cars on site, and they would, based upon council recommendation, remain there. We are recommending utilization of general fund balance. This item, the caboose particularly, went to the Historic Preservation Commission for consideration for landmarking. The commission declined landmarking the caboose based upon the fact that it was moved from its original location, and so they didn't feel like it continued to meet the true standards related to landmarking, and so therefore staff's recommending using general fund balance. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Council members have any questions? Okay. Can I get a motion?
Yeah, I move that I got to get to the top. Apologies. It's longer than I would have thought. I'm almost there. Okay. I move that we approve ordinance number 1914, 2026 upon first reading and set a public hearing for Tuesday, February 3rd at 6 o'clock.
Second.
Okay. Can we take a roll call, please? Wait, any further comment? Okay, now we take a roll call.
Councilmember Kern?
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner?
Yes.
Councilmember Cooperman?
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes.
Councilmember Fahey?
Yes.
Mayor Lay?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Yes.
Good. Motion passes. I will I guess I entertain I don't know that I really need to do this, but I'm going to do it as a procedural matter. Entertain a motion to amend the agenda to move items 8E and 8F to next week's meeting.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, city attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no report this evening.
Great. Any upcoming agenda and identification of future agenda items? Okay, we'll be dealing with that piece next week in more detail. I want to say thank you to Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton for starting our meeting tonight. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you all very much.
Stage, but it's really just a platform about 8 to 12 inches off the ground.